Greetings, wanderers of the abyss, and welcome to a new descent into the darkest regions of cosmic horror. Today we dive into one of the most haunting and unsettling stories ever conceived by H.P. Lovecraft. A story that doesn't present us with monsters we can understand, but something far worse. A terror that defies the very nature of reality itself. An entity with no face, no true form, and no known origin. A color born from beyond the stars. A light that has no place in our world. And yet, once it falls upon the earth, it corrupts everything it touches. Today we explore The Color Out of Space, one of Lovecraft's most chilling masterpieces, and uncover why it continues to unsettle readers nearly a century after it was first written. Prepare yourselves, because this is not just a story of horror, it's a whisper from the cosmos, a glimpse into a madness that our minds were never meant to endure. Let's begin. Beyond the outskirts of Arkham, hidden among decaying forests and stagnant swamps, there lies a place where no one dares to live. It is a land twisted by time, where the trees curl into grotesque shapes and the ground itself seems lifeless. Among the few who remained in that desolate stretch was old Ammi Pierce, a man who had seen more than he cared to remember. Tucked away in the forgotten folds of that land, there rested a neglected reservoir, a silent observer of countless forgotten secrets. The town had plans to reclaim the area, to build a new dam across that maze of rotting marshes and dead grass. But the place they called the Blasted Heath refused to welcome life. Nothing grew there. The soil, coated in a dull gray dust, seemed poisoned. The few trees left were little more than shriveled skeletons, twisted beyond recognition. The young engineer assigned to the project couldn't ignore the unsettling aura of the land. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and unease, he began asking the townsfolk about what the few old survivors still whispered. About something they called the Strange Days. What he uncovered was a fragment of a story, something that had happened long ago, in the 1880s, when an entire family had mysteriously vanished, and one name kept surfacing: Ammi Pierce. The young man sought him out, finding the old hermit living in a crumbling shack at the edge of the woods, his body worn by time, his beard wild and white. Despite his frail appearance, Ammi's mind was sharp. He immediately recognized why the visitor had come, to hear the truth about those cursed days. With a strange sense of relief, Ammi told him everything. For he knew that soon, the waters of the new dam would flood the place, burying its horrors forever beneath a dark, still surface. The story he told was one of a land that once was full of color and life, until something fell from the sky. It began with a flash of blinding light that lit up the woods and fields around Arkham, a light carrying a meteorite that tore through the heavens and struck the earth with a violence that shook the countryside. The air had trembled with strange explosions, and when it cleared, there was nothing left but a deep crater near the Gardner family's old well. Nahum Gardner, the patriarch, was the first to see it. A shimmering stone, pulsing faintly with unnatural hues, half buried by the scorched earth. At that time, Ammi was a man in his 40s. When Nahum told him about the strange rock, Ammi went to see it for himself. Along with them came 3 professors from the Miskatonic University, drawn by the rumor of something not of this world, and unaware that what they were about to find would unravel the sanity of all who came too close. The first thing they noticed was that the meteorite had shrunk. It was much smaller than when Nahum had first discovered it, and to their astonishment, it radiated heat, even in the coolness of night, and gave off a faint, eerie glow. The professors, curious and skeptical, struck it gently with a hammer and were surprised to find the meteorite oddly soft to the touch. They managed to break off a fragment and placed it into a bucket of water, hoping to cool it down, but the heat would not subside. Ammi watched with growing unease as the fragment continued to shrink, hour after hour, burning quietly at the bottom of the bucket. By morning, both the fragment and the bucket itself had completely vanished, as if consumed by the strange material's own invisible fire. The professors were baffled. No matter what they did, the meteorite refused to cool. When they examined the fragment with their instruments, they found something even more extraordinary. The spectral lines it emitted did not match anything known in the natural world. Within the structure of the stone, a color shimmered, a color no one could name, lying somewhere beyond the limits of human sight. Its properties defied logic. They bathed it in acids and other chemicals, but it showed no reaction. It was magnetic, it generated heat endlessly, and it steadily consumed itself, disappearing a little more each hour. Returning to the crater, they found the meteorite still there, but smaller again. One of the professors, determined to understand its secrets, struck it with a heavier blow. The meteorite cracked apart, revealing something at its core. It was described as a globule, a pulsing sphere of indescribable color, the same impossible hue they had glimpsed through their instruments. Another strike shattered the globule into countless pieces, and almost immediately it began to dissolve, evaporating into nothingness. The strange core had been hollow, a fragile shell filled with something no man was meant to witness. That night, a violent storm descended on the region. The professors and Ami sought shelter at the Gardner farmhouse as lightning slashed the sky. And there, huddled against the tempest, they realized something dreadful. The meteorite was drawing the lightning to itself, as if its very nature, magnetic and alien, was calling down the fury of the heavens. 6 bolts struck it in quick succession, each one searing and unnatural. The next morning, the meteorite was gone. It had vanished entirely, consumed perhaps by the lightning strikes, or so they believed. They tried to dig around the muddy, waterlogged ground, thinking it might have buried itself deep beneath the earth, but they found nothing. The meteorite had left no trace. All that remained was a tiny fragment the professors had taken, a sample that, within a week, disintegrated into nothingness. The scientists, left empty-handed, could no longer study its bizarre magnetic properties or unravel the mystery of its impossible color. Before long, they lost interest and moved on to other matters, leaving behind only scattered newspaper reports and strange gossip among the people of Arkham. Nahum Gardner, however, remained a minor local celebrity. The townsfolk often visited him, curious about the strange object that had fallen from the sky. Over time, Nahum, his family, and Ami Pierce grew close, their lives interwoven by the events surrounding the meteorite. Even their wives became friends, spending many evenings together, yet something unsettling soon began to happen. The Gardners' crops grew faster and larger than ever before, fruits and vegetables that were unnaturally lush and vibrant. But when eaten, they tasted sour and repulsive. There was no doubt in Nahum's mind, the meteorite had poisoned the land. As winter fell, the Gardner family began to withdraw from town life. Nahum confided in Ami that he had seen strange tracks in the snow, animal prints that looked wrong, distorted, as if belonging to mutated squirrels or rabbits. One morning, Ami even spotted a rabbit leaping to an impossible height, far beyond the ability of any normal creature. The local fauna was changing, warping into grotesque parodies of itself. Children playing in the woods found twisted, nightmarish animals. The cursed land seemed to melt the snow around it faster than anywhere else, and strange, foul-smelling plants sprouted from the ground. Even the trees appeared wrong, twisted into unnatural forms that could not exist. When the professors examined these mutated plants, they found something terrifying. The same impossible color shimmered in their tissues, just as it had in the meteorite's core, that color no human eye could properly name. By April, the Gardner orchard was a riot of strange blossoms in unnatural colors, brilliant alien hues that disturbed the townspeople so deeply that they began avoiding the Gardner farm altogether. Hidden among the visible colors was that same unnameable shade from the meteorite's heart. Then came the insects. In May, the Gardner fields became a living nightmare of buzzing swarms, and the insects moved with a disturbing unnaturalness. One night, Thaddeus Gardner noticed something horrifying. The trees themselves were moving slightly, even though there was no wind. The poison had reached their very sap. The blight spread to neighboring farms. Soon, no one visited the Gardners except for Ami, and then even greater horrors began to unfold. Mrs. Gardner lost her mind. She ranted about invisible watchers, creatures she could see lurking around them, staring with unseen eyes. Her behavior grew feral. She crawled on all fours, shrieked unintelligible words, and at times, her skin seemed to shimmer faintly in the dark, the same way the poison crops and trees glowed at night. The animals, too, went mad. Horses had to be put down, their eyes wild and broken. Pigs turned gray and began to rot while still alive. The farm became a landscape of death and despair, filled with an eerie, oppressive silence broken only by the terrible sounds of Mrs. Gardner screaming from the attic. Thaddeus, the eldest son, tried to salvage the land by cutting down the poison trees and burning the infected plants. But it was useless. The corruption was not only in the trees, it was in the soil itself. Ami warned Nahum to stop drinking from the well, to dig another one far away from the tainted area. But Nahum, resigned to his fate, refused. The Gardners continued to drink and cook with the cursed water. Imagine the horror, the 3 Gardner sons trapped in a decaying farm, living under the constant screams of their mother, locked in the attic, surrounded by a land that moved and whispered with unnatural life, cloaked in ghostly phosphorescent light every night. By September, Thaddeus himself had gone mad. He claimed that strange colors were moving in the well, and soon after, he could no longer walk unaided, collapsing in spasms of terror. Nahum locked him away with his mother in the attic, where they ranted together in voices that no longer sounded human. Thaddeus eventually died in that darkness, and Ami tried in vain to console Nahum. The grief was unbearable, and no one could comprehend the sheer horror that had descended upon the Gardner family. One night, Nahum begged Ami for help. His son Merwin had gone to fetch water from the well, and disappeared. All that was found was his twisted, half-melted lantern, a heap of scorched metal beside the cursed well. 2 weeks later, Nahum himself vanished. When Ami found him, he was sitting silently in his house, staring blankly into space. Zenas, the last surviving son, had lost all will to live, obeying Nahum's every order like a hollow shell. He kept repeating the same chilling words, "It lives in the well." Concerned for the mother and son locked in the attic, Ami demanded the keys. When he opened the attic door, he was overwhelmed by a stench so foul it was like 10,000 graves bursting open at once. And there, in the darkness, he saw it, a glow, flickering and malevolent, pulsing around something that was no longer human. The shape that moved behind the radiance was not the Gardner mother. It was something else entirely, something birthed from that impossible color that had fallen from the stars. After hearing the terrified cries of his horse, the very animal that had carried him to Nahum's farm, Ami realized it had bolted into the forest, lost to the darkness. He quickly shut the door to that horrid attic and seized a heavy stick for protection. From elsewhere in the house, he heard splashing sounds, as if something were thrashing in water, followed by a deep, heavy thud, like a great weight collapsing to the ground. Cautiously, Ami crept around the corner and into the living room. There he found Nahum Gardner sprawled across the floor, barely conscious. Zenas too had disappeared, presumably claimed by the same horror that had taken Merwin. As Nahum struggled to speak, he revealed a final, dreadful truth. A smoky presence, an unearthly color that could not be named, lived in the well, surfacing from time to time. It was a thing born from the meteorite's core, from the glistening globule that had once pulsed with impossible light. It fed on life, drained the mind, and destroyed everything it touched. Moments later, Nahum Gardner died in Ami's arms. Ami, shaken and desperate for answers, made his way to the authorities. He recounted the nightmare he'd witnessed. The police arrived at the farm soon after. What they found horrified even the most hardened among them. The remains of Nahum and his wife were no longer recognizable as human. Instead, their bodies had collapsed into grotesque, formless masses of liquefied flesh. Forensic examiners, puzzled and horrified, detected traces of the same indescribable color shimmering in their cell structures. A hue invisible to ordinary sight, yet undeniably present. Following Ami's testimony, the officers turned their attention to the cursed well. The stench emanating from it was unbearable, a foul miasma that clung to the very air. Strange gelatinous fluids bubbled up from its depths, repelling anyone who dared approach. When they finally drained the well, the remains of Merwin and Zenas were discovered. Their bodies, too, had collapsed into sickly, amorphous sludge, tainted by that same unspeakable hue. As they removed the remains, the strange color began to fade, turning gray, brittle, and eventually disintegrating into ash. But the nightmare wasn't over. That night, the land itself came alive. The cursed fields began to glow with a furious spectral brilliance, far stronger than anything Ami had seen before. An invisible presence, vast, ancient, and terrible, seemed to loom over them, watching from the darkness. The trees writhed and twisted skyward, as if stretching towards some unseen terror above. The unnatural light intensified, and the air grew thick with a nameless dread. Ami, the policeman, the veterinarian, and the forensic team all retreated into Nahum's abandoned house, seeking shelter from the monstrous phenomenon erupting around them. Inside that abandoned house, they heard it. Something killing the horses outside, something invisible, yet incredibly powerful. And then they saw it. The strange, impossible color began to swell, illuminating everything. The floors, the walls, even the wood itself seemed to pulse with that unearthly glow. Ami, thinking quickly, led everyone through the back door. They ran into the darkness, hearts pounding, barely daring to look back. When they finally did, they saw the entire Gardner farm bathed in that unnatural brilliance, the trees twisting violently as if writhing in agony, the barn and the house engulfed in swirling, vibrant tongues of impossible fire. Then, the horror took to the skies. From the well, that color, that thing, shot upwards like a meteor, carving a black, circular wound in the clouds as it escaped into the night. Its destination seemed clear, the stars, and specifically, the distant constellation of Cygnus near the star Deneb. As it disappeared into the cosmos, the land below lost its ghastly hues, fading into brittle, crumbling grayness. The Gardner farm exploded into a rain of splinters, sending fragments of wood and debris scattering across the fields, flashing with bizarre colors that didn't belong to this world. And then, darkness. A chilling, ascending wind swept through the land, as if the earth itself were breathing out toward the stars and the infinite abyss beyond. This was the story old Ami Pierce had kept hidden for so long, the story he finally shared with the young man who had come to build the new reservoir. And he confessed one final, dreadful truth. The meteorite had carried more than one globule. Some of them still lay dormant, buried deep in the soil, especially in the old well. They hadn't all faded away. Some were still feeding, on the roots, on the land itself, waiting for the day they could grow strong enough to escape, to find new life to consume. Thus ends the tale of the color out of space. Or, as some have called it, the color that fell from the sky. It's a story that strikes at something primal. At the terror of encountering something our minds are utterly incapable of comprehending. Think about it for a moment. If a color truly beyond our perception stood before us, if we could see it yet not understand it, would our minds survive? Would we stay sane? This is the deep fear Lovecraft wanted to awaken in us. A terror not of monsters or ghosts, but of realities so foreign that merely perceiving them could drive us mad. But what was this color? It was not just a rock from the stars. It was a being. Perhaps an alien entity. Perhaps something akin to a god in some forgotten cosmic mythology. It radiated heat and strange energy, consumed life to regenerate, and once it had drained every last spark from the Gardner farm, it ascended, returning, perhaps, to its home among the stars. It was not solid, it was not flesh. It was more like a gas, something that could drift through the void of space without need for air, without need for anything but the life it consumed. It left death in its wake, a contagion mutating trees, animals, even the minds of men. It used whispers. It lured the Gardner children to their deaths with soft voices in the night, voices born of something the human mind was never meant to hear. The Color Out of Space remains one of Lovecraft's most haunting masterpieces. A perfect blend of science fiction and cosmic horror, and one that, even today, reminds us that there are things in the universe far beyond our fragile understanding. And now, before we finish, I'd like to show you today's painting. Here it is, the Gardner farm, the ancient well, and the terrible color rising from it. It was difficult to try and depict a color that doesn't exist, but I did my best. I hope you enjoyed today's journey into the unknown. Leave me a comment sharing what you felt as you listened to this story. I always love reading your thoughts. We'll meet again soon, with new tales, new horrors, and new mysteries to explore. Until then, I send you a warm embrace across the void. Stay curious and stay vigilant.